Okay, welcome back, everybody. All right, so now we have a slightly different format. We have the panel on the Joint Working Group on IUU Fishing and Related Matters. For those who aren't aware of what this group does, it's an interagency collaborative initiative to fight IUU fishing between the FAO, the ILO, and the IMO. And we're very privileged to have with us here today representatives from each of the agencies. So we have Ms. Minmin Lei, who works as a fisheries officer within the Fisheries Global and Regional Processes team at the FAO. Mr. Brent Wagner, the head of the Transport and Maritime Unit at the ILO, and Mr. Brice Martin Castex, who's the head of the Internal Oversight and Ethics Office at the IMO. So before we actually start with the joint working group aspects of the panel, I just want to ask each of the panelists to give a quick overview of the international instruments which they deal with, which you've heard about the implementation today, but you may not understand or know exactly what's in these instruments and their current implementation status. So I think it's important to have that context before we start talking about the activities of the joint working group, as a big part of what we'll be focusing on is the implementation of those instruments and capacity building initiatives to ensure that they are implemented correctly. All right, so to start off, I'll just go down the line, start on my left here with Minmin to tell us about the Port State Measures Agreement.
Thank you. So actually, I understand this is actually the fourth session of this workshop, but in the previous sessions, it's my colleagues Matthew Camilleri and Alicia Mostero who attended this workshop. So this is actually my first time to be here, and I want to thank the World Maritime University and Korea for its hospitality and also inviting us to be here. I think as some of the speakers already mentioned in this morning that the FAO Committee on Fisheries is actually the only global intergovernmental forum where states to meet and discuss issues and challenges related to fisheries and aquaculture. So we refer to COFI. So COFI actually fostered the development and adoption of several binding instruments and non-binding instruments that have reshaped the fisheries sector. As we all know, when we mention the binding international fishing instruments, actually there are three of them. The first is the FAO agreement to promote compliance with international conservation and management measures of fishing vessels on the high seas, and it was adopted in 1993 and entered into force in 2003. And then we have the UN Fish Stocks Agreement, and that is an implementing agreement under the UN Convention on Law of the Sea. It was adopted in 1995 and entered into force in 2001. And then we have the third one, the FAO Port State Measures Agreement, which is the first international instrument targeting at IUU fishing. And the PSMA adopted in 2009 and entered into force in 2016. So while the UNFSA is actually an implementing agreement of UN Convention on Law of the Sea, so it's actually the UN Division of Ocean Affairs and Law of the Sea. This resumes the responsibility of Secretariat, while FAO, actually the team I'm with, the Fisheries Global and Regional Process team, we discharge the secretarial function of the compliance agreement and also Port State Measures Agreement, as well as the Secretariat of COFI and also the Secretariat Network of RFMO. So as you will see that the team I'm working with is actually have a large portfolio. We actually, I think a lot of us consider PSMA as a success because it is an instrument with highest rate of adherence in ocean-related instruments. As of today, there are 74 parties to the PSMA, but actually EU is a single party representing 27 states. So if we do the calculation, it will bring the number of states adhering to the PSMA to 100 states. While compliance agreement is kind of dormant, currently it has only 45 parties. And if we talk about the UNFSA, it has 92 parties. So the absolute number of parties actually outpass PSMA. But if we have a closer look, because out of the 92 parties to the UNFSA, EU is a party, but at the same time, out of its 27 members, 26 are also parties to the UNFSA. So if we do the calculation, actually, we will say that PSMA is actually have the highest number of states adhering to it in all the three internationally fisheries instruments, that is binding. And I think, as previous already mentioned by a lot of speakers, so having an international agreement is important, but the key is with implementation. And then it comes to implementation, we like international organizations have to build the capacity of states, especially the developing states, to enhance capacity to implement the instruments. The PSMA attaches great importance to the special requirements of developing states. That's why the part 6 of PSMA is actually to develop a funding mechanism to allow FAO to have this global program to provide capacity development to states. So in this connection, FAO has already developed the PSMA Global Capacity Development Program with a funding totaling to almost 29 million. And the program allows FAO to support to 55 FAO members to strengthen their legal interagency cooperation as well as operational capacities to implement the PSMA and other international instruments. Also, training is provided through all the three dimensions, as I just mentioned, and we have international training on international fisheries law in collaboration with IMLI and also ANCOS, University of Wollongong, and international training on inspections with the Port of Vigo in Spain. And as Mr. Park already mentioned, that currently we are also exploring further collaboration with Korea to develop Busan as a PSMA regional training hub, benefiting the PSMA parties in Asia Pacific. And of course, we have to thank both Norway and Korea because they have been important resource partners to the PSMA Global Program. I think last but not least, I want to also mention, apart from the binding international instruments, actually FAO and through COFI also developed a lot of non-binding instruments in the auspices of FAO, and that also helps shape the sector. And I will name just a few most relevant ones to today's topic. The first is Code of Conduct for Responsible Fisheries, which is pretty much the backbone of national fisheries legislation in many jurisdictions, and also the International Plan of Action to prevent, eliminate, deter IUU fishing, and the recently adopted voluntary guidelines for transshipment. Actually, transshipment, I want to add, because I think that also responded to Ms. Park's observation, because in the PSMA, if it's container vessel with fish products previously landed, and then is exempted from posted measures, and that actually creates a loophole, as Ms. Park already mentioned. So one of the driving reasons for us to develop the voluntary guidelines for transshipment is also to kind of address this loophole, because in the voluntary guidelines for the first time, we give definition to transshipment and landing. And the most important thing is either it's landing or transshipment, it has to be properly documented. And then Annex 1 and Annex 2 of the voluntary guidelines give you a form to see what kind of information should be documented when you define landing or transshipment. I think this is from my part. Thanks.
Thanks so much. That was a very comprehensive overview of the FAO's activities and their instruments. Great, so let's move on to Brice to talk about the IMO and the Cape Town Agreement, and also the STCWF, if you'd like to.
Yeah, thank you very much. Well, you see the three agencies here, and this has been the beauty of everything to do with a fishing vessel, is that ILO, FAO, and IMO are really in very, very close partnership for everything to do with this sector. And this is quite unique on such a long period of time. You were talking about the joint working group. In fact, it was created in 2000, so we have already 22 years of close cooperation. So my neighbors here are very happy because they have their instrument in force. Congratulations. IMO has one, STCWF, but this is not really our aim. We really want to have the Cape Town Agreement in force, and not only we, you, because you are the one to benefit from it. And I was very pleased to hear Mr. Jimenez, who is the chair of the council, one of the top responsibilities in the organization, who has done so much for the entry into force. So the situation is very positive. May not sound, because we were supposed to have the Cape Town Agreement in force in October last year. But because of the COVID and situation, we took a little bit more time. But I really, really believe that we will see the Cape Town Agreement in force very soon. The way it works for IMO instruments is that we have two sets of criteria: the number of countries. We need to have 22 countries. We currently have 17. And we need to have 3,600 fishing vessels of 24 meters and above. And thanks to the colleague from South Africa, they don't have to fish on the ICs. They have to be capable of operating on the ICs, which is a big difference. So this should help all countries who have or who consider becoming party to the Cape Town Agreement to deposit an instrument. You just count how many vessels of 24 meters and above are capable in terms of safety requirement, certification of the crew and so forth. They are capable to operate on the ICs, even if they stay fishing in the EEZ or any more other places. So this is very important, because we currently have 17, and to be honest with you, as Mr. Jimenez was saying, we are talking about Belize, who was one of the first country highly supporting everything to do with safety of fishing vessel 15 years ago. We have, of course, Japan, a very important player. We have Portugal, and thanks to our host, we are talking a lot about Republic of Korea, because this is really not the Far East, because I understand this is culturally wrong. The close East is the most important part of the world for the entry into force of the Cape Town Agreement. And we need these countries. So Japan, Republic of Korea, and New Zealand. We are talking a lot about New Zealand, and also Indonesia. So there are really clear prospects that we are going to fulfill the first criterion of 22 countries very soon. Then is the number of how many fishing vessels. Currently, we are around 2,000. So we almost we need the 1,600 more. And even the countries which have already deposited an instrument should review the numbers they declare. So again, we really hope to have this criteria entering into force very soon. We have, and you were saying, and there are older instruments FAO contributed to. The safety of fishing vessels is not about the Cape Town Agreement. There have been many non-mandatory instruments, and the one, for example, was the safety of recommendation for decked fishing vessels of less than 12 meters. We worked with ILO as well. So there is a regulatory framework, non-mandatory, but available, and we have the Cape Town. So what are the benefits? There should not be any problem to become party to the Cape Town Agreement. First of all, as you know, it's for new ships mainly. So it's not the question of looking at your fleet. The Cape Town Agreement entering into force will be applicable to new ships mainly. There are chapters, 4 of them, but they have a very progressive implementation of 5 to 10 years to bring these ships to the level of safety recommendation. So it's quite easy to implement. And you should become a party not only when you are a flag state, but also when you are a port state and a coastal state, because you would benefit from it. When you are a coastal state, you put your inspectors on board foreign fishing vessels, and you want these people to be able to work safely. When you are a coastal state, you have search and rescue services, and if Cape Town Agreement improves the safety, you would not have to carry out so many rescue operations. You are going to be able to attract more young people, because sometimes the conditions of work on board fishing vessels are not attractive, and you may have even more women. I know there are some women, especially on the coastal fishing area. I'm from Brittany, and I know Scarlett Decor, I can quote her. She's a very famous fisher woman, and they are very, very interested and very useful in this sector as well. Casualty investigation, there was a reference earlier, and I'm sure that Mr. Olivier will be talking about casualties. We have to learn a lot, and currently there is no mandatory requirement for investigation of casualties. This will come with the Cape Town Agreement. You don't have port state control activities mandatory. This again will become mandatory under the Cape Town Agreement. The IMO number scheme, because this is the basis when you want to identify, to analyze, you need to have an IMO member, not only for the vessel, but only for the company, ship owners. This will come under the Cape Town Agreement when amended. You have plenty of things coming with this very important element, which would be the Cape Town Agreement. The word exists, people are catching fish, you are able to find fish in your plates, but this is a terrible activity which requires a minimum standard of safety which currently do not exist. So I would just like to thank colleagues from FAO and ILO. We have already carried out very big achievements. The Cape Town Agreement was born during the joint working group in Rome. I don't know where the next session would be, but definitely FAO has provided a very good nests for our instrument to be developed, and are looking forward for the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Brice. Okay, so let's move on to Brant now to talk about the ILO and the Working Fishing Convention.
Thanks, Catherine. Yeah, first I'd like to say it's a pleasure to be in Busan. First time I was here was in 1982 on a ship as a young ship's officer, and I seem to come back here every 10 years, and it's better every time. Just a few words first about the ILO, because we come at this issue of IUU fishing from a different perspective. I think as you've seen, we're a United Nations specialized agency, and we're tripartite, which means governments and representatives, employers and workers, and that means representatives of fishing vessel owners and fishers also have a vote and a say in our work. Our focus is decent work. So our whole thing is about working conditions. That's what we do. So when we come at the issue of IUU fishing, that's always the perspective that we come at it from. We're what we call a standards-based organization, meaning that we adopt conventions and recommendations and protocols which set out international law on a whole variety of labor issues. And what's important with the ILO is these international instruments, the conventions and the protocols, once they're ratified by a state, then they're subject to the ILO supervisory system. So we work with the state to make sure that the law, that it actually implements its obligations. And this is why it's very important that countries ratify the convention. So a little bit of an advertisement. We're hoping Republic of Korea will ratify the convention soon, because you're very important for fishing and therefore for us and fishers. Now, in the ILO, there are many different approaches to the issues that we face in the workforce. Sometimes we approach things from the perspective of forced labor, sometimes child labor, sometimes labor inspection, many different ways that we look at the issues that we face. We have what we called fundamental principles and rights at work, which basically talk about no forced labor, abolition of the worst forms of child labor, rights to freedom of association and collective bargaining, and against basically fighting against discrimination, which apply to everyone, including in fishing. Selwyn Bailey has already discussed Convention number 188, the one specific for the fishing sector, in quite detail. I won't go into great detail on this, but as you can see from his presentation, the convention covers most of the issues that are important for somebody on board a fishing vessel, including things like medical examination, I don't know if you mentioned it, but crew lists, medical care at sea, occupational safety and health. And it has some flexibility for smaller vessels. It has provisions for flag state control, board state control, and control of labor supplying states, for example, of recruitment and placement services. It's in force. It's been ratified by only 20 states so far, but Spain will ratify by the end of the month, which is very important. It's been ratified in this side of the Pacific by Thailand. And it stresses consultation. And I think this is also important for IUU when you're putting in place regulations to consult with the industry all the time, both the representatives, employers, and workers. Now, fishing as a sector has a lot of problems. Even though it's a great sector, it provides the best source of food in the world, but there are problems with forced labor. We have a figure of about 128,000 people engaged, 128,000 working right now in forced labor on fishing vessels. Occupational safety and health is a big issue. Eric Holliday is going to speak about this later, so I won't go into great detail, but we've just seen a case in Korea, just in the last week, of a vessel going down with a lot of people on board. Brice just mentioned the issue of attractiveness of working. So this is something we have to think about. If we want to have a sector that works in the future, we have to make it attractive to people. And that's important. That's why we try to improve the conditions. for Convention 188 and all these things, the ILO has produced a whole lot of publications. I won't list them now. We've had workshops, training, all kinds of things. We have lots of projects going on all around the world. Projects both on Convention 188, on forced labor, and even on migrant workers, migrant fishers, because a lot of fishers, people working in fishing vessels, are actually migrant workers. And the problem that they face is not just in this region, it's in Europe, it's in the United States, it's everywhere. On the IUU fishing issue, many years ago, we are very careful about what we do, and our constituents told us to work with FAO and IMO on migrant fishing, on the IUU fishing issue. So we have an instruction on that in a way. We've had many issues meetings where we discussed this. We have the joint working group, and a couple of years ago, following decisions taken by various agencies, the ILO became a full member of that group. And that's important because we bring in the labor issues into the IUU group, but also because we bring in the voice of fishing vessel owners and fishers into the debate at the intergovernmental level. Now, challenges, we're trying to get the convention inspected and implemented, just like my colleagues from the other agencies. One of the things we found is a big problem is coordination among agencies. This is a huge problem in every country, every single country. And this coordination is also with the people involved in, it's between labor, maritime administrations, fisheries, et cetera. So this is something that we're working on a lot. And what we're doing here in this joint working group in a way is also trying to set an example at the international level of what we think should occur at the national level. Finally, some recent developments. Regional fisheries management organizations have become more interested in labor conditions. They've approached us. We've been talking to them. We have MOUs with some of them. There's a lot of pressure out there to fix these conditions, not just because they're bad things, but also because the market wants them as well. And all over the world. Finally, I think there was a statement early this morning about forced labor and how we deal with that. The ILO is working right now. We will publish soon a manual and indicators of forced labor in fishing that will help people, not just labor ministry people, but fisheries inspectors, maritime administration inspectors, port state control officers, identify forced labor, and then be able to deal with it. Even if they can't deal with it themselves, they will be able to see match them against the indicators of forced labor, and then make contact with the right authorities who can intervene. And lastly, generally speaking, we're also seeing, as a new development, regional port state control agreements get more interested in fishing. In the Latin America regional agreement, the Viña del Mar Acuerdo, they're already looking at fishing. Tokyo MOU, covering the vast Pacific region, is looking into fishing, and the Paris MOU in Europe is looking into fishing. So there's really a lot happening, and what we're trying to do is do this in a coordinated way. And it was very interesting. I was listening very closely to Selwyn because I've listened to Selwyn for a long time, and he mentioned something. We don't say what authority and what state should do inspections, but I saw creativity in that. Even though SAMHSA does most of the inspections, he actually said that they were training some fisheries people to actually do some inspections of labor conditions on small vessels through an MOU or other agreement. So there's a lot of things we can do. It's very interesting. And thank you to my colleagues and Catherine.
Wonderful. Thank you all for those overviews. I think that's a very good baseline for what we're going to talk about today. So moving on to the activities of the joint working group, and a big part of what has been discussed today, and a big part of what the joint working group has done to date in terms of its activities, is to attempt to bring instruments into force that are not yet in force, like the Cape Town Agreement, and also to promote the ratification and uptake of instruments with low ratification. But of course, ratification requires resources, and for many developing countries, sometimes those resources are lacking. So capacity building is, of course, very important. And of course, each agency is undertaking capacity building activities under their own mandates. But my question for the panel, and anyone can take this up, is whether there are joint capacity building activities in the works. I'm thinking particularly of something like port state measures, because each of these agreements have provision for port state measures for enforcement. And this is potentially an area where national governments can collaborate between safety, fishing, labor, and so on. And so the question is there any plan to do these joint capacity building activities at national level or regional level? And if not, are there any plans in the future? Yes, Brice.
If I can just start, because this is one of the success story of the joint working group. IMO is a rule maker. I mean, we have something like 50 mandatory instruments, but we are not EU, right? We are not supranational, so we need someone to help for the implementation. And at IMO, we have two main ways. First is the audit. You know, we have a mandatory audit of member states, and one day, if the Cape Town Agreement comes into force, when it will be into force, it may become one of the instrument basis for the audit. The other one is post-state control. And post-state control, as you know, they are the equivalent of the RFMOs for FAO, except that they are more independent compared to IMO than RFMOs. So we currently have 10 post-state control regime, we call them, 10 of them. 9 are regional, and you already gave some of the names. What happened through the joint working group last time is that there were some regions who were really eager to start a pilot project of cooperation between the inspection under the post-state measure agreement and the Cape Town Agreement. And this, we had the volunteers from the Indian Ocean region, and we have the Indian Ocean MOU with the post-state control regime under IMO instruments, and you have the IOTC, the Indian Ocean Tuna Commission, which is a very efficient RFMO. And they have decided to create a partnership. So thanks to Australia, because they provided some funding, and they have recruited someone who is, as you said, working on the issue of capacity building. So it's not the idea of one doing the job of the other. It's more to have the two inspection regime being harmonized and knowing about what the others are doing. And as it was said, I mean, you go on board a ship for one purpose, and you can see, you can feel that something else is wrong. You may not have the authority to inspect, but you can call the colleagues of other administration, labor, of agriculture, to come and to complete the inspection. And this is what we are trying to do currently with in the Indian Ocean region. But when I was hearing, of course, the case of NIAFC is a very efficient RFMO as well, and there is a potential for them to work with the Paris MOU, for instance. The Tokyo MOU, of course, would be one of our strong partners. They work very closely with IMO for many capacity building operations. We have MAPSEAs, we have many projects in the region. So definitely IMO would go at the national level, of course, but we have, luckily in this context, regional organizations which are very, very powerful and very close to IMO. They are IGOs, and they are in consultative status, and they attend the meeting. So we hope them being involved in the next joint working group again, and we will try to develop another or more of these projects associating RFMOs and IGOs and post-state control regime for the purpose of capacity building. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Brice. Does anyone else have a comment?
Really quick, just to add that, because Brice, I think, said most of it, but to say that every time we train now people for inspection of Convention 188, one of the things we try to do in our training is to have an element that makes inspectors aware of what other people are doing. So if we train labor inspectors, we try to make them aware of what fisheries people do and what maritime administration people do. If we train maritime administration people, we try to make them aware of the others. It's really important during the training process that everybody understands what other people are doing with respect to vessels. But Brice has, I think, covered almost everything else. Thank you.
Great. Min, do you have anything to add?
Yes, just to also mention that because like the PSMA program, when we are actually in a country to do this like a gap analysis workshop to understand the country's legal and operational framework, usually we also invite maritime and also custom and immigration, those agencies relevant to implementation of PSMA, to kind of awareness raising for them to figure out their role and responsibilities in post measures. And actually in our national workshops, we also invite IMO and IAO to be present to present their instruments as awareness raising. And also, as I mentioned, one of the important dimensions when it comes to PSMA, implementation of PSMA is this interagency collaboration. Because usually we find in different jurisdictions, there are many agencies involved in post measures because it might be the maritime agencies that receive the advanced request of entry, and then it will pass the information to fisheries agency to check those information provided, whether there is like there is potential for engaging in IUU fishing. So in our work, we always try to facilitate the interagency collaboration to try to, if we could help those countries to develop a MOU among the different agencies to implement PSMA. And also we are also trying to broaden our scope to also look at those requirements in the Cape Town Agreement and Convention 188. So this is what we're currently doing, but also, we are planning to have a interagency training in this July, and it will be held in World Maritime University. And actually, we will also invite IMO, and so it will be joint one between the three agencies, where the IMO will also introduce the requirements in the Cape Town Agreement and the IUU Convention 188. And apart from that, FAO is also currently doing a global study to kind of understand the benefits of coordination between fisheries agency and maritime agency and also labor agency, and to see how the three agencies could, how the three different relevant agencies could collaborate to better implement the PSMA and also Cape Town Agreement and the Convention 188. And we are actually looking for national experts to be contributing to this study, because we want to understand how this process takes place and works in different jurisdictions. So if you're interested and also contribute to this global study, please reach out to me. Thank you.
Great, very interesting. And we are looking forward to delving more deeply into these issues in July. But picking up something that Bree said about the IOTC Indian Ocean MOU, perhaps I understand that was a joint working group initiative. So perhaps you could talk a little bit more about that, how the joint working group facilitated that, and also whether this is looking to be replicated in the future in other regions.
The idea of harmonizing inspection regime is very core to the work of IMO. To be honest, even the industry itself is in favor, because we have something we call multiple inspection. And when you are a ship owner, a manager, you are finding difficult sometimes that your ship is being inspected and re-inspected every time it goes somewhere. So the idea has been always to try to bring those in charge of inspection working together, share data, recognizing that the inspection by one is validated by another. This is why IMO is at the center of different initiatives. One of them is, of course, the mutual recognition of inspection among the port control regime. We are far from that, but it's working a little bit among Paris, Tokyo, and Indian Ocean MOU. So here we are. This is, again, something. And you know that according to the FAO definition, for example, a cargo ship involved carrying fish is a fishing vessel, which is, of course, not the IMO definition, but this is their definition. And so the cargo ship would be subject to IMO port control inspection, and also under the PSMA. So this is one of the examples where a lot of people attending this joint working group said, maybe we should try something. And I have to say the Indian Ocean region is always volunteering for everything. I mean, they are really wonderful to work with. And they were the first one to come forward and to say, let's try to work together. In some countries, for example, in France, this would be the same administration, the Maritime Affairs, do everything. I mean, they inspect the fishing vessels, they inspect the cargo ships, and at the time they were also doing a labor law. Now it has changed a little bit. So some other countries, these are separate administration, and as Brown was stressing, one of the weaknesses of our system is that the national administration don't talk to each other. And this is why the reason for the joint working group initially was for the 10 or 22 or 26 countries representing the members of FAO and IMO. Each country was supposed to bring both their transport and agriculture administration. This was the key reason. And we hope to see the way they do it, ILO doing the same, bringing the people of the same countries to be able to talk to each other and to discover. So this was the time. Indian Ocean region volunteer. We were thinking as well about the Mediterranean Sea, which was very interesting because they also have the Paris MOU on the top. They have the Black Sea MOU on the east. So it was really an interesting interface to start building something. We have another region which is very dynamic, which is very interesting as well, which is the Caribbean. They have a very active port control regime, the Caribbean MOU. And they are dealing with all sorts of activities. For example, with small cargo ships, they have developed their own set of regulation, which is quite successful. And they have quite a lot of fishing activities as well, and some which are terrible. I mean, I remember the shrimps. I mean, at the time of piracy, there were all terrible things going on off the coast of Latin America. So the idea was really to have this momentum growing. And although this is a joint working group, it doesn't have really a decision-making power, but the working group makes recommendation to our respective bodies. And it didn't work really perfectly at the beginning, but now I have to say that I know that COFI, the Committee of Fisheries of FAO, is really looking into the outcome of this group. IMO, we have two committees, the Maritime Safety Committee and the Marine Environment Protection Committee, which we are looking into it. And environment is very important because the joint working group talks a lot about discarded fishing gear, plastics and everything. So it's opening up on all sorts of issues and environmental ones, which are very important. And this is how we develop. So you need the recipes, you need to have some few individuals particularly motivated, and this was the case for the Indian Ocean MOU, and to have money, and again, thanks to Australia, to have a volunteer to fund this. And if there is anyone interested in the room for another region, I mean, don't hesitate, don't wait for the next joint working group, because we are not sure exactly when it will be, but we can try the initiative right away. Thank you.
Very interesting, and yes, take note, people. Any other comments?
Yeah, just to make a brief comment, when we talked about the joint working group, and it's true that it brings together maritime administrations and fisheries people in the international context. In the ILO side, we brought in employers and workers. But we have to still address this problem of coordination at the national level, because governments are governments. So this is why even in our convention 188, there's a specific requirement. It's an obligation if you ratify the convention to have a coordination mechanism. We've been working on different ways of doing this. For example, we're setting up something in Namibia now. There's something set up in Ghana, which seems to be working pretty well. And it brings these ministries together and often representatives from the sector. Because, I mean, we can't rely on it completely to be done at the international level. You have to do it at home. And so we're trying to come up with ways to help and share experiences on that as well. Thank you.
Great. Any further comments? Okay, perhaps we can change tack a little bit because it's come up a few times now, and particularly in regards to the ILO is the issue of representation. And of course, we have a lot of representation by NGOs in the Joint Working Group. Most of them are, in fact, Global North NGOs, but there is Stop Illegal Fishing represented, which is, I believe, incorporated in Botswana. But I was actually wanting to ask this time about industry, the participation of industry, because there aren't a lot of NGOs representing industry currently participating in the Joint Working Group, as far as I understand. So perhaps, Brand, you could start.
Yeah, just again, now one of the issues that we have in meetings, in the ILO, when we have an international meeting, we actually pay for the employers and workers to come to our meetings. So we cover their travel and their daily, their costs, hotel costs, which is expensive. So when we entered this joint working group, there was a question how to do it relatively economically. So in this case, we have 4 altogether, which is maybe not as wide as we'd like, but it was something that we could afford. So it's not as full as we'd like, but it is something to get the voice in there. And I'm sure in both the other UN agencies and all your work, when you're implementing something, an international law or a national law, consultation is extremely important. It's the only thing that makes it work. Consultation before you draft the legislation and consultation as you implement it. And I think Selwyn was talking about some examples in South Africa. They sat down with people. You heard this description of ports, even port state control. They sat down with the agents representing Japanese fishing vessel, and they said, look, let's talk about what we're going to do. And instead of the nice answer was they actually passed all the inspections, which is what we want. We don't want to detain fishing vessels unnecessarily. We want to improve standards. So this is the kind of thing we need to do. So that's what ILO brings into it as well. It's something that's in our very DNA. And this is something which is important for these groups as well to make them effective. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, Bruce.
Regarding the representation of the industry, we are in the middle of two different formats as far as the joint working group is concerned. Traditionally, it was small scale. FAO and IMO were identifying the same number of countries, 10, 11, 12, depending on who wanted to join. And as I said, for each country, they were expected to bring both agriculture and transport. But then we had Torremolinos, and as explained by Mr. Jimenez, we had plenty of people. I mean, the ministerial conference benefited from a very wide funding, and we had a lot of people attending. It was very, very successful. I really don't think the next joint working group will be the same scale. I mean, now, as far as the industry is concerned, these meetings of the joint working group are clearly open. There is no requirement, it's not closed. I mean, anyone, any organization which has a status at IMO can attend. So you have all the NGOs representing the industry, the seafarers and so forth, they can attend and they have attended. In the past, you had the International Chamber of Shipping, and they were coming, and it was and they could submit documents, make presentation. They can be very active. We still have the question of fishers and their representation, and I'm sure, and I know that ITF and others are really working hard. So I hope we are going to increase this representation of the fishers because we need it. But I think that I don't have the list here, but if you look at the IMO website, I think we already have some NGOs representing the fishing sector in terms of industry, ship owners, and they are already represented, and the meeting is open to them. And I'm sure that talking about the entry into force of a new mandatory instrument, as well as possibility of capacity building and so forth, they will come. Capacity building in the context of maritime matters is interesting. For example, port state control officers most of the time are former captain, chief engineer, naval architects. So this is the industry itself. You know, at some point, these men and women, they have a partner who say, you've been at sea for too long, so either you become a professor at WMU or administrator of maritime affairs. At some point, they need to come ashore. And becoming a port state control officer is one of the options. In the fishing sector, I believe it will be the same. You have captains, you have an engineer on board fishing vessel, and as they did in South Africa, and it was explained, you have to train them. They will be the core of the people being able to put in place a workable inspection regime. Okay.
Great, thank you. I actually just wanted to follow up on that. So it's quite interesting what you say. So the industry is actually choosing not to attend these meetings rather than not being able to. Yeah, Brent.
Yeah, I'd just like to say one thing that relates maybe to the joint working group, but also to the national level work. In our convention, we have, I think in the fishing convention, the word consultation appears something like 22 times, right? That's fishing vessel owners. It's also representatives of fishers. And what we found in some countries, this is actually a good thing, a very good thing, because in some countries, the fishing sector is not so organized. The people are not organized in a way that they can speak for themselves effectively. So by having this requirement, it's actually really helped the organization of fishers at the national level. Rosin can probably talk about this maybe tomorrow. And I think we have like an example in Ghana. We had all these people who are working on foreign vessels in Ghana, and they, by virtue of this work we've been doing, they got organized, improved their conditions, improved their pay, and could stand up for themselves with the backing of the unions. And so it's same thing as on the employer side, the fishing vessel owners. It helps strengthen those organizations to have a better voice for the industry. This is something that's sometimes lacking at the international level. So this is important in the context of the joint working group, but also at the national level as well. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. All right. So now I just wanted to actually pick up on something that Min said earlier about how the voluntary guidelines on transshipment have actually given the first definition of transshipment. And of course, the FAO has, got a lot of different instruments dealing with IUU fishing going back many, many years. And they have got a definition or a description of IUU fishing in the International Plan of Action for IUU fishing. And that definition is very much focused on fisheries management. But the joint working group is now, of course, dealing with labor and safety issues as well, related matters. And more we're understanding that there are a lot of different aspects of IUU fishing and related to IUU fishing, including maritime crime, safety, and labor. So, as far as I understand, there was an intention to, there was a proposal put forward to amend this definition of IUU fishing in the past to be more inclusive. But that was not passed, and I'm just wondering if there is perhaps any intention in the future, or how you see this, because of course it's been brought up quite a few times today that the definition of IUU fishing may be a bit problematic. No. I'm talking specifically about the definition of IUU fishing. Yeah.
All I'll say is on this, when the definition of IUU fishing really came about, it came out through I think the IPOA. I mean, at that time, I remember this meeting actually, and we said, let's put the labor conditions in illegal. They said no. So now the ball falls to I turned to my colleague from FAO. But what we're doing now is we've made this link between illegality, and now we've actually been very informed about the sensitivity of illegal, unreported, unregulated. But we've turned to this issue: when you do things illegal, you tend to do other things illegal. If you do illegal fishing, seems to be a tendency. I'd like to have this backed up with better data on also use of undocumented workers, fishers, and that's a huge problem. So I think everybody's come to recognize this, and so we're all trying to, but we're grasping with some parts of it. A lot of it starts at dealing with how people are recruited in the first place. That's where forced labor often starts. But as for the definition, I turn to my colleague.
Yes, so actually the joint working group, I think as our colleagues already mentioned, so when the discussions and recommendations coming from the joint working group, and the international organization has to report to its governing body regarding the recommendations coming from joint working group, and then it's up to the governing body of the respective international organization to decide the way forward. But as we already mentioned this morning, because IUU fishing does not really have a definition per se. It's actually a description to describe different scenarios, and that is in the IPO IUU, which was adopted in 2001, and we know over the past year there were some pushes to say, why don't we also to expand the definition of IUU fishing? So illegal fishing could also refer to the fishing that is in violation of labor-specific legislation. But FAO's position on this is kind of negative, because IUU fishing is already very complex, and if we open the possibility to also extend the violation of labor-specific law, and maybe another sector legislation will also step in and said, hey, why don't you also open to the other subject specific law? And it will make things more complicated. And as I also mentioned this morning, because the idea to develop the IPOA IUU is not really to bring definition of IUU, but is actually to provide the states with a robust toolbox to see as in the state in its capacity as flag state and coastal state and market state and port state, what are the measures in the international law that it could deploy to combat IUU fishing? So as far as I understand, currently our position on this is rather prudent.
Yes, of course, Brent.
If I may, first of all, joint working group, when we came to IMO, because people really focused on maritime transport at the time, and we say we want a joint working group on IUU fishing, it would have been no. So we have a joint working group on IUU fishing and related matters. That's the beauty of the related. Sometimes we do as appropriate. This is the same way of opening everything. So
Yeah.
I think the issue of IUU is kind of academic, because we are not going to create a convention, not at IMO anyway, on fighting against IUU fishing. It's just going to be bits by bits. And I really love the presentation of the I and the U and the U this morning. It was very, very interesting. And we just are going to deal with our little corner. For example, something which was raised earlier today was the fraudulent registration. That's a very big issue. It's true for the fishing sector, but it's true for all maritime sector in general. As you know, we currently don't have a convention. This was an UNCTAD convention which never entered into force because of the question of the genuine link at the time. And we are all in limbo because everyone is doing something about the registration of ships, but no one has a proper instrument. So IMO, very discreetly, without trying to upset our colleagues, we are putting more and more requirements related to registration, but no one really has the mandate. And I think this is going to something to come. So it would be related to IUU and the fight against IUU, but I think each of organization will look into specific points without having the need for a very clear and definite definition of IUU or ENN in other languages.
Thanks. If I could just, I'll be very quick on this, but I heard something, we're here not just to say things, we're here to learn things, right? I mean, like everybody else, right? And I was listening to Dr. Hanish Quentin's comments this morning, and one thing, I don't know if this falls in this category of IUU, but it's certainly something in the joint working group. I think we can make better use of fisheries access agreements. I think we can use these as an effective tool to control a lot of things, at least from the ILO perspective. We have a recommendation that accompanies Convention number 188 that actually recommends, not binding, that coastal states require labor conditions and fisheries access agreements. And of course, what does it mean? It means at the end, if you don't do it, you lose your access, I suppose. But I think there's a lot of creative things we can do. We just have to be more creative using the tools we have, but also going beyond them a little bit. And I think the joint working group is a place for some of those discussions as well. Thank you.
Great. Yes, I actually completely agree with you on the access agreements. I think that sometimes they have a lot of good provisions, but they're not very well implemented, and there probably needs to be more regulation and sort of more mechanisms to actually enforce that implementation better. But yeah, I mean, if the joint working group could discuss that, it would be great. All right, so I'm going to stop asking questions now and open up the floor because I see that Professor Hanish has a question.
Thank you. To be honest, I'd never heard of the joint working group before. So as Brant was saying, this is a time for listening and learning. And I'm really impressed. I think you are demonstrating a really sophisticated coordination and understanding of many of the problems. And I agree very much with this idea of the toolbox as well. And I'm just also thinking about in terms of the access agreements, which I also agree is a wonderful way of expanding the jurisdiction and settling some of these jurisdictional problems. The best one I've heard of so far is the FFA MTCs, the minimum terms and conditions, where they've actually put in place some labour requirements. And I represent a country in the FFA sometimes, and I've also worked for a few other countries at times too. And this is a key issue. I mean, Fiji just hosted a labour workshop for the FFA on trying to address some of these issues. So I do like what Brant was suggesting there with access agreements. It's a key way forward. But I'd also suggest that the Pacific is probably working very heavily on that, and I'm not hearing them talked about here. And just in terms of the national coordination, having worked for a few different governments over the years and having seen governments across the negotiating table come back to us and say, look, we can't talk about that, we don't have a brief. That's not our mandate, that's the ministry of whoever. But so I'm really impressed. I think this is a wonderful initiative because you're basically enabling that type of coordination and facilitation. So I'd just like to congratulate you for it.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I think what you mentioned this morning is actually very relevant, that the Pacific Islands negotiate together, they present a united front, and that's really been instrumental in ensuring that their access agreements are fair and are enforced and implemented. Are there any further questions? Yes.
This is a question, but also a compliment for the great panelists we have. And you are becoming in a professional panelist because every time you gather together to explain the issue of the fishing vessel safety, IUU fishing, you are providing even a better performance than the previous ones. So, congratulations to the three representatives of the UN agencies. And the question is related to the establishment of port state control regime. Many times during this panel has been raised this issue. How confident you are on having a port state control regime for fishing vessels in the near future? How will be the benefit of having this kind of mechanism? Because if we make the same comparison with the merchant ships, definitely the port state control regime has been a very important, a key tool to grant and to reassure the level of compliance of the IMO instruments. So what is your views on this at a fishing vessel side?
Yep, who would like to take that question?
I can say it quickly and then I mean, just from the ILO perspective, right, just to share, you know, when port state control of ships started, right, merchants, when it started really in Europe with the first Paris MOU, that actually started out as ILO and IMO conventions. Actually started out first as something to deal with conditions of work and then joined together with IMO to become a way to inspect safety of vessels, marine environmental pollution, as you know so well, and living conditions. And if we look at that, as you said, as an example, it was really, really effective. It's been a great way of putting pressure on all these issues and improving them. So we would hope that fishing would be the same. The trouble with fishing, like first, we have to get the ratification of the conventions because to become a relevant instrument under an MOU, usually the argument is how many people in the region have ratified the convention. So we need to get these conventions ratified. But I mean, this is being explored, and I think they're even looking at, maybe Reese would know better, a voluntary start on this and then seeing how it works out and then maybe eventually making it an agreement. But to be honest, to support Reese and you as well, I mean, the key here, the key is the Cape Town Agreement, because Cape Town Agreement is the solace of in a way, of fishing. And once we get that in place, I think things are going to move a lot faster. But until the Cape Town Agreement is in force and has a lot of ratifications, it's going to be slow going. So, but the benefits of it are tremendous. Thank you.
I think it will happen because it's a natural evolution once an instrument of this magnitude comes into force. And I really believe that the Cape Town Agreement is one of the pillars, but is essential in terms of changing the mindset of the professional, the public and everything, saying that now the fishing sector is safer. I believe people are going to try to do something about inspecting. Just to remember how the Paris MOU was born. And it's funny because one of the reasons was the fairness. The problem was that in the region, the European region, some ports were free ports. You could go, no one was expecting you. It was really free, and they were attracting all the business. And some other were carrying inspections. And of course, when you carry too many inspections, you are less attractive to the ship owners. So they created a regional system where all the ports had to carry out a certain level of inspection. So the bottom line was fairness. And I think that in the fishing sector, it's all the same, because it's going to be about where you disembark the fish, where you have all the industry behind processing. And so you are going to have a competition among the ports themselves. Another thing which was interesting in port state control is that because of the development of, and I'm not going to use a certain word, the development of open registers, some countries lost their fleet, right? But still they maintain a maritime administration. And port state control has been for them the opportunity to remain active in the world of maritime without being flag state anymore. So This is going to be the opportunity for all these countries, mostly developing, who don't have fleets, who are not flag state, to be able to have a say, a real say in terms of ruling the sector of fishing and making sure that the ships are safe, the crew are safe, and their inspectors are safe as well. The only question is the reluctance of some port state control regime, Paris MOU in particular. They really don't want to just extend and deal with a fishing vessel. So the people who are currently carrying out the inspection of merchant ships are not jumping on the opportunity of expanding the scope of their inspection. So there are very important discussions, Paris MOU, Tokyo MOU, and others, how to move. And no one is saying if, they all know when, and they try to get ready. Some even think there should be a separate port state control regime, maybe other rules, other mechanisms. But surely we will have, because of fairness, and I don't think that we should leave the carrying out port state inspection to individual ports. It has to be collective, it has to be fair, it has also to do it properly. You have a burden, you need to train the people, you need to share the costs. So this is better achieved regionally, I believe. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions from the floor? Yes, Raphael in the front.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Brice, because you brought a very important discussion on the floor just a little bit before. You were talking about fraudulent registration. I think what has been interesting in all the discussion, we talked a lot about how we can solve a problem afterwards, basically, because port state is basically when it's failing at a flag state level. When we have flags which are today targeted, we have PSMA, for example. One of the key elements is what we've seen from or the presentation from Korea. One of the #1 criteria was flag. And it's pretty interesting to see that. And we're still turning around. And thank you, Brice, because you brought a little bit the discussion about fraudulent registration, but there is more dimension for that. And do you think that the joint working group can work together on this issue and also bring this issue about the flag and probably considering a flag state performance indicator? There is already industry which is providing indicators, there is already MOUs which are providing some idea classification, and bringing the knowledge that you have in all your different agencies together and trying to bring something. If you have some ideas.
Just a quick one. It's interesting because you mentioned this. One time when South Africa, the first ship was detained under Convention 188 for violation of because South Africa did this very effectively. We really pressed this and got a lot of news out there because we want to make the message to people that port state control is a serious thing, and if you're running fishing vessels with lousy conditions on board, that you might have your ship detained, and actually that worked quite effectively. But I get this call from this guy who was a BBC, one of these guys who does BBC interviews, and he called and he said, "Can you do an interview?" Oh, okay. So I did this interview, and then at one point he said to me, "So, which states are the bad states?" And of course, being an ILO official, I couldn't really say that. But what you're saying is this gives you this information as well. When you start doing port state control, you start revealing the states that have, and then you start getting these things. And then the port state control system as a mechanism focuses on the states that have a bad record. And then you have the, that kind of process that puts the pressure on in a very systematic, legally based, legitimate, and well-organized process. So what you're saying, I mean, if flag state's supposed to be the first line, second line is port state control, but port state control can actually help improve the performance of flag states.
Well, that's the purpose, yeah. I think that targeting the state is complicated because, for example, we know that in the maritime transport, it takes around 15 minutes to change flag, right? So the flag is important, but it's very easy nowadays, and I think the fishing sector is already more or less the same. The flag is not necessarily the main thing. Behind that, you have the classification society, and this is something which is going to be very important with the Cape Town Agreement. I believe you are going to have more and more the recognized organizations, the ROs, to deliver certificates, because the ship will have to carry certificates. port state and flag state have to cooperate. This is always the idea. I mean, this was Mr. Sekimizu was always talking about shared responsibility and bringing what flag state have and port state have to do together, because in many cases, flag state have to thank the port state to know a little bit more about their ships, and there is a spirit of cooperation. It exists for PSMA. I love the idea that one of the key things after an inspection in PSMA is to talk about the flag state, and they take the measures. This is something it's not really the logic in our inspection regime. But there is something just, I heard you say, the port state is to replace when the flag state is failing. The port state is also positive. There are more and more discussion about what we call the incentive scheme. I mean, you have the green award and this kind of thing. The fact that you are not going to inspect a ship is a positive thing. So you may gather data that the ship owner has very good records or this kind of thing, and the ship is guaranteed not to be delayed by inspection. This is a positive aspect of port state control. And on the fraudulent registration, yes, I mean, the fishing sector is already targeted, and we have even less guidelines on how to register a fishing vessel. So definitely the joint working group will be looking into the work of the legal committee, because it's currently under the legal committee, and there would be work. For now, we only provide numbers from 12 meters and above. We may have to consider providing IMO numbers to smaller ships, which is to be negotiated with the company, which is currently doing it for free on behalf of the organization. But there are some discussion at IMO. They want IMO to take over the management of the numbers. So I won't see it because but it's going to be challenging. Thank you.
Yeah, just to add to that, because the idea of joint working group was actually prompted by a call of FAO Coffee in 1999 regarding IUU fishing and reflagging issues, because we understand so flag states resume the primary responsibility in control of these vessels, and that's why FAO developed this FAO compliance agreement to set out what exactly flag state responsibilities in control of these vessels operating high seas. But we all know we have like states of non-compliance and flag states convenience, and so that's why that FAO members gradually to grow interest in post-state measures. But I think Blaise already mentioned, because even in post-state measures, Article 21 is about the role of flag states, because so when the post states in your inspection you detected the vessel's potential in engaging IUU fishing, this has to be notified to the flag states, and the flag states has to take action, investment action, and the investment action has to be communicated to FAO, to the port states, to relevant RFMO or even coastal states as applicable. So there is always like this collaboration between port states and flag states, even in the GIES, the Global Information Exchange System that is developed on the post measures. So currently we have 3 modules. The first is denial of entry, and the second, the inspection reports. The third one is flag state actions. And I think one interesting aspect is post-state jurisdiction, because I noticed in Norway's presentation they already mentioned what kind of enforcement measures post-state could take against the flag states, and then he mentioned including like administrative penalty or confiscation of catches, and also even the withhold the vessels until a reasonable bound. So this is definitely a very interesting aspect, and actually I think one of the important success I didn't manage to mention is the global record, because the global record, as we all know, like as Brice also mentioned, vessels change flags very conveniently, and then so in 2005, following the Rome Declaration, actually FAO members requested a development a global record of fishing vessels, but at that time we have this difficulty because we don't have a unique vessel identifier, and that is actually in collaboration with IMO. So they introduced resolution to actually allow fishing vessels with 100 gross tons and above will be eligible to receive an IMO number. So even if the fishing vessel changes flag, changes name, the IMO number remains the same. So you have something to actually track the compliance history of the fishing vessels, even if it changed flag and changed names.
Thank you so much. So I see we have run out of time, so I just want to ask each of the panelists for final thoughts on the future of the joint working group. What do you want to achieve in the future? What's your number one goal for your respective agencies within this group? Let's just start with Min Min and go down the line.
Yes, I think first of all, we would really want to see the entry into force of Cape Town Agreement. and then I think one prospective area of collaboration could be developing this like joint guidelines for the inspectors, because already mentioned like when in some jurisdictions we understand there in some jurisdictions there is joint inspection where the inspection team like containing the fisheries authority and maritime or labor authorities, but in some I think in more of the jurisdictions they just undertake a different inspection by different agencies. So I guess the idea is to see how the three agencies could collaborate and develop guidance document for the national agency for the facilitation of the joint inspection for
Well, thank you for supporting the Cape Town Agreement. But IMO will remain interested even after the entry into force. I think what is important to preserve, as I said, is this unique spirit of cooperation which exists. Sometimes IMO turns to ICAO because we are all in transport, but FAO, ILO, we are really a family, and there is so much to do. I mean, as I said earlier, we are turning to environment-related matter, which are a priority. There are issues of the human people because this is a very serious matter, and it is very sad. And there are a lot of things to be done collectively to try to improve that. We need to be close to the member state because you have a way of talking to member states. We have all the same, but in fact they are different. We don't say the same thing. We don't have the same people. So the platform of being able to talk collectively to member states is very useful. So I love the platform. We have to face crises. I mean, you remember COVID-19 was apparently is finished. I don't know, but during the COVID crisis, our organization have cooperated, not only FAO, ILO, but there was the issue of seafarers or fishers who are blocked in the port. So we have demonstrated that FAO, ILO, IMO, and other agencies can cooperate. And I think this is a spirit, and we need the support for our member states because we are just the secretariat, and we are in the hands of our masters, and they really have to support this initiative. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. I'll be quick. I mean, having been in this business, sort of international organization business for a while as well, like I think everybody here, I think with the joint working group, what we have to do is be very smart about how we set up something like this because these meetings only occur periodically. So we have to be very smart about what we put on the agenda and what we think we can achieve that helps promote. There's a lot of all this other work going on. So whenever it happens, we just need to think very well about how it's set up to put things in motion that don't necessarily depend on the next group, which will occur 4 years later. So that's what I would say. And that may be in itself establishing more regular methods of coordination. We have to be smart about who we invite to the meeting. There may be other people that should be invited who can actually help solve these problems and express themselves. So without getting into the detail, I think that's it. We just have to be very good about this. And maybe this is a central place to bring things together, because what I see now is a lot of things happening all different places. There's this event we're in. There's a Pew. Pew has really gotten going on this stuff. They're promoting the Cape Town Agreement as well as all kinds of sustainability issues. They're helping us a bit in some ways. But we need to maybe have one place that will help coordinate these things in a grand scale way, and then without having duplication, but achieving effectiveness. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much. So thank you so much to all our panelists for being with us here today to talk about this important initiative. We really do appreciate it. So let's give them all a round of applause. Wonderful. So that concludes the program for today. I hope you all got a lot out of it. We will be having a dinner and drinks reception at the Paradise Hotel tonight. And we would appreciate if you could all meet in the lobby on the first floor at 6:15. Is that correct?